So today, let me remind you where we've been so I can get you where we're going because that'll matter today. We spoke last time about setting an end game goal but assessing our current reality because the current reality will tell us how to take next steps to get to the end game goal. The end game goal, our long-term goal, this is the goal that does not change. This is the goal that does not shift over time. This is your North Star. Here's where we're headed. This is, for Moses, the promised land. We've got to get to the promised land. Your current reality, they've just walked out of Egypt. They're a group of nomadic ex-slaves who have no idea how to survive in the desert, wandering around the desert. And here's the problem. Sometimes you can move to a next step, a new reality. This is your current reality. Sometimes you can move to a new reality and get stuck there. What do you do when you get to a new reality and all of a sudden you're stuck there? Well, Exodus chapter 14 gives us a good example of that. In Exodus chapter 14, and I'll start with verses 1 through 4, let me just get you where we're going. The Lord said to Moses, "Tell the Israelites to turn back and encamp at Pi Hahiroth, between Migdol and the sea. They are to encamp by the sea, directly opposite Baal Zephon. Pharaoh will think the Israelites are wandering around the land in confusion, hemmed in by the desert, and I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and he will pursue them. But I will gain glory for myself through Pharaoh and all his armies, and the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord." So the Israelites did this. Now, let's be clear about this. What God has called them to do is not take the shortest route to where they're going. They know that their end goal is the promised land. There is a straight line route from where they left Egypt to Israel, what is modern day Israel. There is a straight line there. They are not following the shortest route. God sends them on a different route. Literally, God sends them on a route that hems them in. In other words, when they get here to the Red Sea, what happens is in front of them is the Red Sea. On either side of them are cliffs. There's only one way back out, and it's the way they came. Now, when God gets them here, it's as if, well, it's not as if, it is that God has led them into a trap. God has led them into a space they cannot escape from. They're stuck here. They're caught here. Their movement has been stopped. This will happen to you in your leadership from time to time. And sometimes those moments when you feel trapped and you're hemmed in, water on one side, cliffs on the other side, enemy behind you, sometimes those moments are of the Lord. Sometimes God wants to show himself to you. Watch. Sometimes God will use restriction. He will use restriction in your life so that it will give the people the space to learn faith gradually. You and the people that follow you need to learn that God can deliver you from any problem at any time. But the only way you learn these things is for God to see you through. The only way you learn that God is always faithful is to be in a moment where if God isn't faithful, it's not going to work. If you look, it's when you get over the edge that you know that it takes God to get you there. There is this great scene in an Indiana Jones movie, Indiana Jones and the Search of the Holy Grail, I believe, where he's looking across a chasm and he's going to fall to his death if he steps out. But the riddle he has to answer says that he has to have faith. And so he's looking down. There's no way. He can't do it. And he just realizes what he has to do. And he just sticks his foot out and steps out into thin air. And then the perspective of the camera changes. And when it shifts, suddenly you're over to the side. And there's a full bridge there. But it's been painted in such a way that it blends into its background so well that you can't even see that it's there. What he had to do was step out into faith onto solid ground that had already been put there for him, but he didn't know it was there. That's what God does when he gets you in these restricted places. He puts you in a place where you look forward and you just know, if I do this, this will never work. It can't happen. There's no way. It's impossible. And then God does something with it. God leads them. I mean, look, you know the rest of the story. God leads them to the Red Sea in order to show them that he's going to deliver them. They don't have to deliver themselves. They will have God to deliver them. But in order to have that happen, you have to face these restrictive moments, these moments that stop your movement, that stop your progress. And in that moment, you must trust that God has a plan, because what he's really doing is giving you space, the space to learn faith gradually. Faith is not one of those things. Let me just be honest. I understand that there are moments. There is a moment when I say, I choose to believe in God. There's a moment when I say, I choose to have faith in God. There's a moment where that choice is made, and that's an instant, that's an event. But really, faith, real, deep, lasting, sustaining faith, that's a process. That's allowing God to constantly provide. I often tell the story, when I was in college, we didn't have the money to feed our child. And I would go out to the mailbox, and a check would be there from somebody I didn't know. And God just provided. God would provide over again. I remember being in college, and a guy at church handed me a $20 bill and said, God told me to give you the $20 bill. And I went, hey, I knew the guy didn't have any money. And I was like, dude, I'm not taking your $20. He says, don't steal my blessing. So I took his $20 because he punked me into it. And so we're driving back up the mountain to App State for our college, and to go back to college. And it's pouring down rain. Car started to stall. I pulled over. We drop off into a ditch I didn't see was there. And we were stuck. We couldn't get it out. Some people stopped and tried to help us get it out. We couldn't. So I called a tow truck. The guy pulled us out of the ditch, and I said, how much do I owe you? He said, $20. Y'all, I had forgotten that the $20 was in my pocket. And so I reached down and pulled out the $20. I said, well, this is yours. And I just gave him the $20. God had provided. Those moments led to moments when we took on a building program at our first church, and we weren't sure we could afford the payments. We did it. The church grew. We were okay. It led to moments where we moved to Maryland, not knowing if we would see God move, but knowing that God had called us here, and God showed himself capable. Moments where we set out to do building programs here, and God showed himself faithful. Moments when we set out to start new churches and didn't know if it would work, and God showed himself. The faith builds over time, but every time there is this moment where you feel trapped. Every time you make a big decision like this, there is this moment, or at least for me, there's this moment where I feel trapped. I've stepped out in faith, but deliverance has not come. Progress is stopped, but God has not split the sea yet. And in that moment, it's difficult and it's tough, but those are the moments that God makes you stop and says, hey, watch me. Just watch what I'm going to do. That's what he says. I will gain glory for myself, he says, through Pharaoh and all his army. It then goes on when we jump down to verse 21. And in verse 21, it says, Moses stretched out his hand over the sea. Now listen, by the time we get here, the Israelites realize they're trapped. They realize that the Egyptian army is now pursuing them because Pharaoh's changed his mind. Now, a lot of people wonder, why did Pharaoh let him go and then change his mind? Well, there's probably a lot of anger involved here. There's probably a lot of pride involved here. However, there is a simple economic reason for this. What Pharaoh has done when he let the children of Israel go is he has released his entire workforce. The Egyptians have not worked for themselves in decades to centuries. They've had the Israelites working for them as slaves. Well, now he's released his entire workforce, and it's going to crush his economy. Look, don't think that just because we're talking about an ancient culture there weren't economic concerns. No, this was going to crush his economy because now the Egyptians had to do the back-breaking work they had the Israelites doing, and the Egyptians didn't want to do it. I have a feeling that after he let the Israelites go and he's in mourning and the whole nation's in mourning, I have a feeling that some hours after the mourning kind of settled down, maybe a day or two, some advisor walked in and said, Pharaoh, who's going to do the work? You can't let them go. And I have a feeling that's actually the motivation for Pharaoh and all of his armies going out to pursue the Israelites, is to bring back their workforce. And so the Israelites are now trapped, and Pharaoh and his armies either want to re-enslave or slaughter the Israelites right where they are. It all depends on whether we're dealing with anger and pride, or whether we're dealing with an economic issue. But at any rate, it's not going to end well for the Israelites. And they don't have a way to fight. They don't have weapons. They're not an armed nation. They're a nomadic group of ex-slaves who are just trying to survive, and now they're trapped, and there's cliffs on the other side, and there's the ocean in front of them, and now Pharaoh's behind them and all of his army, and they're stuck. And God says to Moses, hey, Moses, walk out to the Red Sea and hold out your staff, and I'll split the sea, and you'll walk through on dry ground. Okay, listen, hear me. Nobody has ever seen this happen before. This has never been done before. And Moses now hears from God. Now, just deal with it. He hears from God, Moses, but he's the only one hearing it. He look. The way most people would hear it, he's hearing voices, and the voices say, "Go out to the edge of the water and hold out your staff." If this doesn't work, Moses is crazy. They'll think he's insane. If this doesn't work, look. If Pharaoh takes back the rest of the workforce, he's killing Moses. He's killing Aaron. The people in leadership are going to die today. And so there's only one way out of this. And that one way out of this is to step up and to do what God told him to do. Look, I want to show you something. You've got to understand that God brought you to the restriction so that you could learn faith. But in order to come out of the faith, in order to learn the faith, in order to come out of the moment, you have to take risk. Restriction shows faith, but it's risk that brings reward. Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and all that night the Lord drove the sea back with a strong east wind and turned it into dry land. The waters were divided, and the Israelites went through the sea on dry ground with a wall of water on their right and on their left. Y'all, I have no idea what that looked like, but man, that must have been impressive. And they go through, I've heard the old preachers say, they went through the Red Sea kicking up dust. I love that phrase. And so they walked right through the Red Sea. God provided the answer. Listen, you have that restriction that is going to teach faith. It brings a reward, but faith is only learned on the other side of taking the risk. On the other side of, as I talked about with the Indiana Jones example, getting your foot out there and stepping onto what you think is thin air, only after you do that do you realize there's solid ground there. The risk is what brings the reward. Watch. But when God tells you to do it, when God is with you, listen to me, it's the only time I'll ever say this. When God is with you and you know he's with you, bet the farm. Bet the whole farm. Now, I have to tell you that over the years leading the church and leading different organizations, there are times that I've just had to bet the farm. I've just had to say, that's it. What if it breaks us, it breaks us. Recently, during the whole COVID crisis, as the district superintendent for the Chesapeake District of the Wesleyan Church, we got all of our pastors onto a Zoom call, and we said, look, we're not going to let you go under. We'll break the district before we let any of you go under. So if any of you need help, you call us, and we will provide the money you need to get going, to get through. A couple of our churches took us up on that. Most of them didn't have to, praise God. But we were willing to bet the farm in order to see the movement continue forward. Look, when God's with you, don't hedge your bets. When God's with you, bet the whole farm. Because if God's in it, that's going to pay off. And that's what you've got to remember, is that God is the one who knows what's next. God is the one that can split the sea. And he did. He split the sea for the Israelites. Now the story continues. Then the Lord said to Moses, stretch out your hand over the sea so that the waters may flow back. Wait, the Israelites have already gone all the way through. Israel is now safe. They are now delivered from the Red Sea. But the armies of Egypt have now driven themselves into the sea to chase the Israelites because, look, it's dry ground. So chase them. They're going to go get them. And God says, stretch out your hand back over the sea so that the waters may flow back over the Egyptians and their chariots and horsemen, over their chariots and horsemen. Now Moses stretched out his hand over the sea at daybreak, and the sea went back to its place. The Egyptians were fleeing toward it, and the Lord swept them into the sea. The water flowed back and covered the chariots and horsemen, the entire army of Pharaoh that had followed the Israelites into the sea. Not one of them survived. God will then, after you take the risk, God redefines your reality. Watch, it's here. It's here. God, you've got, watch. Your current reality was, if you look at Moses and the children of Israel, the current reality was they were slaves that had just walked out of Egypt. Their new reality was they were trapped in front of the Red Sea with cliffs on either side. But what God did, because they listened, is God brought them to another place, and now they have a redefined reality. Because God has said, look, now you're not just escaped slaves. You know what just happened? You just won your first battle against a major army. And you didn't have to do anything to get it done. You just walked through. That's what God wants to do. He redefines you. And in these moments, the reason some people are not comfortable with moments like this is that they don't want to be redefined because they just don't want what they know to have ended. But look, when God redefines you, when God redefines your organization or redefines your position, don't fear endings. Don't. Listen to me. Don't fear endings. Recognize beginnings. The Israelites turn around and everything they knew was now gone. There was no way they could ever go back to Egypt. On the other hand, the only major army that had the wherewithal to chase them down and destroy them was the Egyptians. So now everything they knew is now gone. There's an ocean now between them and what was. Well, it's a large lake, but there's a sea between them and what was. But what else is true is everything that could threaten them was now gone. Their threats were gone. They were truly free. Listen, the Israelites weren't truly free till they were on the other side of the Red Sea, because that's where God set them free. That's where God gave them a new beginning. And they had to recognize that, and they did. But the Israelites went through the sea, Exodus 14, 29 to 31. They went through the sea on dry ground with a wall of water on their right and on their left. That day, the Lord saved Israel from the hands of the Egyptians, and Israel saw the Egyptians lying dead on the shore. And when the Israelites saw the mighty hand of the Lord displayed against the Egyptians, the people feared the Lord and put their trust in him and in Moses, his servant. Listen, results matter. Results matter. Watch, I'm going to show you this. God gives us a restriction so that we have time to build our faith. He asks us to take a risk, which if we're willing to do, he moves in. He then redefines our reality, and then he gives results. They turned around and they saw that God had delivered them. And results matter, watch, for a long time. Listen to me. We are still telling this story. All these years later, we are still telling this story. Results matter for a long time, and they matter because they not only set your people free, they empower you as a leader. They put their trust in God and in Moses, God's servant. Listen, we got to take the risk. Even when God's restricted us, we got to take the risk. We got to get out there, because when God's with us, we bet the farm. But when we bet the farm because God called us to, he redefines our reality. And once our reality is redefined, he then gives the results we've waited for all these years. And suddenly those results matter and hold us strong for a very long time.